Link, the former CLG mid laner, has returned to competitive play in the LCS by joining up with Team Liquid. Now, this was announced. Initially, it looked as though he was just becoming a sub, but actually Team Liquid themselves have confirmed, their coaching staff, that the plan is to rotate Link and Golden Glue, the person that they had as their starting mid laner, over the split, and they've even tried to frame it in the way that people often do when they claim it's going to be a real rotation, as though like no one has the starting spot, and they hope both players will be really good, and then they can swap them in and out. I mean, people in NALCS won't necessarily know this example, but presumably, like they did over on AHQ, when they had Choi and Westor, where those two players had very opposite playing styles and opposite champion pools, and so they literally would just swap one player in, one player out, depending on the comp they wanted to play. And for a long while, up until Worlds, it looked like they legitimately were just going to play that combo and decide how to go from there. So, who is Link? Well, Link as a player is someone who initially was best known as the CLG Black mid laner. Now, CLG Black there wasn't a challenger back then, but it was the equivalent of the challenger team. It was the second team, the farm team of CLG, Count Logic Gaming. And at the time, he was the real core piece of that CLG Black lineup. He was the up-and-coming talent, someone where many people in the scene acknowledged he was a very good player, a very talented player, a very skilled player, but crucially, at the time, he didn't want to give up his academic pursuits to go all in on gaming and being a pro gamer. I mean, admittedly, at the time, this is Season 2, there wasn't as much opportunity then, salaries weren't as high, no one knew what LCS would be and how it would go. But Season 3 comes along, LCS starts, and he becomes the starting mid laner for the main CLG team, because Big Fat LP had been struggling throughout Season 2. Big Fat LP, once one of the best players in the world back in pre-Season 1 and then Season 1. But Season 2, he'd struggled the whole time. CLG had strengths elsewhere, so Big Fat LP took a backseat. He's someone who didn't really want to move into a team house anyway, and in comes Link. So when they bring in Link, he remains the starting mid laner right up until Spring Season 5. So we're talking about 5 splits overall. When he left the team and didn't re-sign, he released what everyone now knows as the Dunzo manifesto. It was like an 17 or 18 page Word document where he just goes through all his grievances and all the things he thought about his time in CLG and as a pro gamer and the problems that they'd faced throughout each of the splits. Famously, it actually provoked, I'll put it up here, one of my most popular videos, which was called Link's Tiny Violin, where I actually analysed the Dunzo manifesto and kind of like pick some of the holes of it and address some of his grievances. And he certainly has some points that he makes. I can certainly understand. It's one of those cases where it's not that everything the person said is invalid. Like, certainly these things are all real reasons that contributed to him failing to succeed and some of the problems he felt as a person. The problem I always find is when they take a reason and they make it into an excuse, and they use the excuse to excuse away their own part of it, their own culpability, their own responsibility in what happened, and opportunities they had to change things, and then why ultimately they didn't succeed. And so if at the end you use all the reasons to just blame everyone else, and at the end you're almost blameless, which isn't entirely what he did there, but in many cases it was, then that's where I have an issue, and that's what a lot of that video was about. Now, in the Dunzo manifesto, a lot of the blame goes to Doublelift, who he sees as almost like a bullying figure, who just loses trust in his teammates and kind of betrays them to some degree and dominates them. He really downplays Monte Cristo's role as a coach in their success. I mean, famously he said that he just taught them how to use Sivir comps, and yeah, like LoL, it was just a Sivir comp, and tries to downplay the idea that Monty and his rotations and macro style of play had any influence on CLG, really. With that said, Link was a strong player. People won't realise it because in the playoffs he didn't have very strong performances, but he was a strong player. Go look at those regular splits, and yeah, this guy was good. Now, the reason why that's a problem for me, that people make out like he wasn't a good player ever, is because look at Doublelift. Doublelift never had any deep playoff runs until the last split in CLG. Well, I mean, I guess he had like one before that, didn't he? He had the one where they came to third place, which Link was part of as well. And then when he went over to TSM. Yet we all know he's a strong player. We know he's a fantastic player. And actually, he wasn't necessarily choking in most of those games. Now, the issue Link had was that, yeah, he was a strong player, but he tended to choke in the playoffs. Now, there's many great players in history. Usually not like the best players, because being able to perform under pressure is part of being a great player. But you can sometimes even be approaching a Hall of Fame level player without having a whole lot of playoff success, actually, if you were fantastic in the regular season. Now, this is a guy who, part of what made him a strong player was he had a very deep champion pool at all points in his career. He could play most of the OP stuff. He always had a deep pool. He could play different champions depending on what the comp was going to be. He was a cerebral player, he was a very intelligent player who really seemed to have a sense for how the game worked and as a result what to play. He, in the latter days of the Skara coaching of spring 2015, season 5, he did the pick bans for most of the season, and the shot was like a primary shot caller, which was part of the issue because then when they went to the playoffs, if he's choking and he's the shot caller, that's going to have a massive knock-on effect elsewhere. Now, he was someone who early on in his career in CLG seemed to have issues developing a carry mindset. He would be like a good player, but it was just Doublelift show early on. And Hotshot obviously had fallen off massively, and then they had Big Fat LP as a jungler. They had a lot of problems, and it was mainly just Doublelift carrying, and Link was kind of like good, but he never really was like a primary carry. He didn't win a lot of games for you, really. He did get better in that sense. He got much better under Monty, and he seemed to get quite good towards like Season 4 time. But he did choke in the playoffs, and characteristically, actually, there would always be like one big moment where he'd choke. It wouldn't just be that he choked all the games away. He'd do like a weird pick that he then couldn't play somehow in the playoff game, even though he has a fantastically wide champion pool elsewhere. Or he'd do a moment in a game where he'd just like hesitate, or he'd fuck up a skill shot in a way that's actually uncharacteristic for how he normally played in solo queue or regular season games. And these would be the ones that stick in your mind that cost them the game, or very much accelerated CLG's losses, essentially. Unfortunately, one of the core problems I had with him as a player was, not only did he choke, but he seemed to be in denial of that. And I haven't spoken to him recently. I think the last time I spoke to him was probably last year. But he still, I mean, I've never seen any signs that he actually came to grasps with the fact that, came to grips or whatever. What am I talking about? Came to grasp, whatever. Came to grips, got a grip on the fact that he was choking. He seemed to be in denial of that, which I have to say, unfortunately, is a common problem with people who tend to choke. And I actually think it's part of the reason why it becomes perpetuated, because they just decide that it's not them choking. That's not part of the reason why. It was just the situation played out like that, and therefore they don't make the changes that they need in their mentality or actually how they play. Like, for example, if you can play a certain way in a regular season game or a practice game, it doesn't mean you can always play that way in the playoffs. Like, maybe if you have some issues, you should play a more conservative style, or you should play a more balls out style. Whatever you do, you've got to figure out a way that takes you out of that situation, the environment from which you then choke. You want to make it a different environment, a different situation from which to play from, and then that's going to build up your confidence that you aren't someone who's going to choke. And in time, maybe you can introduce that style that you had before. So you just look right now in the scene. Okay, H2K and Prolly and the players in H2K are in denial that they ever choked, even though they did it like every LCS split, and every LCS split under him. They just complete denial that it ever happened. And as a result, guess what? It continues to happen because you're never addressing the problem. There's also the issue with Link that he did not have an assertive personality. This is someone who, the term passive-aggressive fits him to a T. He absolutely is passive-aggressive. If he doesn't like something, he doesn't like the way something's done, he's not going to confront it. He's not going to cause conflict. He's not going to resolve it. He's not going to find some solution to it. He's just going to get annoyed by it. He's going to let it get under his skin. He's maybe going to talk to someone privately who isn't going to be able to fix the problem. And as a result, there's going to be this discontent that's going to fester. And he's going to end up in a situation where then when everything goes to shit, now there isn't a strong structure there of people trusting each other and blaming each other and having kind of a solution as to what we're going to do, a plan B and a plan C. And so when plan A doesn't work, the whole team goes to shit and he goes to shit. And then he's going to be resentful of what's happened, and he's going to blame other people, and he's going to feel like it's not my responsibility. Yeah, I knew this was going wrong earlier on. That's one of the problems that he tended to have. He also clearly had issues with people who had dominant personalities, who had very assertive personalities. I mean, obviously, Doblett's an extreme example of this. There's very few players who are like that, but he clearly had huge issues with that guy over the time he played with him, even if there would be times in the regular split when it was going well, and they seemed like they got along. He also, on a low level, because of these two factors, had some behavior issues during the time he was under Monte Cristo's tenure. I mean, he's someone where, again, because he was passive-aggressive, the way he does things and his response to something won't be direct. So as a result, it's more difficult to solve a problem with Link. Like, it's going to manifest in some other area. You're going to think it's going to be resolved, it's going to be left, and then it might come up later. Now, that's very difficult to work with as a coach and as a teammate. I mean, admittedly, people who are very assertive can be very difficult to deal with, as we've seen with Doublelift in his career. I think part of the problem in terms of when he got to the Skara era is that if that had really been mostly Monte Cristo and his teammates that were the problem, then why did the same issues in terms of choking and bad performance occur under Skara? When, as far as we can tell, and from Skara's interviews, I did one with him, it seemed like he kind of let Link do whatever he wanted and let Link have a lot of say, a lot of responsibility, and yet the same problems happen. Yet these are different people now. So with him coming back to Team Liquid, we have to first of all assess the new Team Liquid lineup to see where he'll fit into that. So as usual, I'll just run down the players. So they have Lolo, he remains. They have Matt remaining. They have Piglet back in the lineup. Obviously, he was playing with those players before. The new players are Reignover as jungler, Golden Glue as the other mid laner, and let me see. Yeah, that's it. That's the 5. So I'll go through these players. Okay, so Lolo. Now the problem with Lolo is that in the spring split of Season 6, he struggled. I mean, he really had his issues. He was one of the players I thought was actually kind of whack on that team. Like, I think he was one of the players who held them back, just in terms of individual performance. Not like he was the reason they lost, but he was one of the players who couldn't get up to the level of Piglet, of Dardoch. And at the time, in that one meta, and playing with Piglet, Matt was performing better. I think he was the overrated one out of Piglet and Dardoch, though. Out of Dardoch and Matt, though. I think people were trying way too hard to make it those. Matt and Dardoch were both these mega talents that were super amazing. We're going to be the next best players, even though they were from NA. No. Dardoch, certainly. Matt, he's had his good times being up and down. So Lolo, he really struggled in that spring split. Then in the summer split, when Piglet went out, and now they had more focus around top, and his best friend is the jungler, Dardoch, and as a result is someone who can give focus to top, and Dardoch was a super sick, aggressive player who's going to gank a lot, then Lolo did pretty decently. Now I say pretty decently because he had good games, but I still wasn't convinced the idea that he could be like a carry top laner. Like he could be one of your first or second priority players in the team and have that kind of like focus around him from your team and from the opposing team and perform well from that. I think he was good, but in that sense, I feel like he was propped up. Admittedly, in the spring split, if he's someone who's played his whole career in that style, yeah, he wasn't getting what he needed in the spring split, and as a result, he was doing quite badly when he was like a low econ top. But then when you gave him the priority in summer split, problem for me is he wasn't dominant enough. He wasn't enough of a carry, and crucially, I think he was propped up by having Dardoch, who was, to my mind, very sick and a very great, exactly the sort of jungler I'd want if I was the top laner. So my issue now is with Dardoch, with Lolo, is that on one hand, like if I was designing the team, he would go back to not having much priority. So I could see him struggling again, especially because the top lane position is even more like dense now. It's more densely packed and it's a lot more stacked with good players, elite level players potentially, than it was before. You've got Flame, you've got Someday, you've got all these really good players that have come over now. So I think that's an issue right there. Looper, obviously. Problem I have is, it might be the case that maybe he does get some priority again, because in comes his jungler as Reignover, and Reignover's a player where he spent his last 2 years playing with Huni, and Huni's someone who gets all the priority top, who's always going to get the jungler working with him, going to get him ganking. So maybe Reignover wants to play that way and will play that way with Lolo. I would hope he doesn't, and I would suspect he doesn't, and that instead Reignover, because he's someone who's vaunted as a cerebral player who understands how to to actually control the map and get the team ahead, I would assume instead he's going to like gank for bottom, for example, and help Piglet out. So let's talk about Reignover. He's someone where I actually think in Fnatic he was the most overrated player. I mean, the most overrated player in Fnatic, I mean, aside from the fact they had Reckless, who will eternally be overrated, I think the most overrated players in Fnatic were in this order. Reignover number 1, because I think Huni got a lot of that done in Season 5, in a way that wasn't the case in Season 6. And I think Febiven, in terms of, he never had to have leads in lane, he never had to dominate in lane, he just had to have these certain outplays in the summer split, and certain times where he looked good. He was like the insurance policy for me. If the other carries failed, then he came in and could carry the odd game and look really good. But I think Spring Split, he was very good as a rookie, and then I think later on, he developed more skills in that sense, but his champion pool limited him. So I think that, for me, Reignover was the most overrated in Fnatic. With that said, coming to Season 6, now he impressed me, because now Huni wasn't as much of an impact. Now Huni had his own issues in terms of how they played, and I actually thought parts of the Immortals lineup before, they were a good team overall. Certainly, as a unit, they were very good, but some of that team was pretty whack. Like, as a mid laner, yeah, okay, Pobelter was decent. He had some good games. He had some good runs, especially on certain champions. But look who else he had on his team, drawing bans, etc. Then you go to the bot lane. Okay, Adrian had a very small champion pool, did pretty well on it. While Turtle, I think, only survived off the fact that they had that ridiculous meta where he could go balls deep and he had like a Maw of Malmortius and all that sort of ridiculous shit. And heroes where you could like pull people in, you could get out, etc. Fucking hell. I wish people would fuck off messaging me. Right, and so then there's the issue of Reignover in Season 6. So I actually think Reignover in Season 6 probably was the best jungler in the NA region. Like, yes, Svenskeren got it together in the summer split and had some very good games. He was more towards Worlds. I thought he was getting better. But I think overall Reignover was, for me, the clear best jungler in the region and was a monster. But a lot of it came down to Korean-level understanding of wave manipulation, of how to set up a gank with your top laner, and then when to come in and do that. So my problem, I think, that he had, as you've seen many people point out, is that when the lane swap came in, this kind of killed him a little bit. Now they had a lot more issues where he couldn't just control the whole map. He couldn't just necessarily set up things the same way they did before. And now they had to play off the individual strength of all the players as much. So for me, yeah, Huni was still very good. But now you looked at those other players and some of them could not hang in the same way. And they were kind of hit towards the end of the split. And I think that's part of the reason why they didn't go to Worlds. I also think the fact that he doesn't have Huni might be an issue at this point in time because Huni was obviously a Korean as well, so they could have a very close relationship, and Huni was the main carry of the team. So I think that's certainly something I'm looking forward to. But I actually have faith, or rather, I think based on what I've seen and what I've observed and read about Reignover, that actually he will adapt and he will instead prioritize bot lane and he'll work around Piglet, and then he'll know when to go between top and mid, and then actually he'll be one of the best junglers again, and he'll be a key player in this team. Now, in terms of the mid lane, so originally it was going to be Golden Glue, right? Problem with Golden Glue is he's had his chances in LCS and they haven't been convincing. I mean, he played a few games for Dignitas in Season 4 Spring. Those were kind of whack. Admittedly, it wasn't his team, obviously. But then he did have his own team, didn't he? Because then he was on Team 8 in Season 5 Summer. And what happened there? Well, it's not really particularly convincing at all, was it? His times in Challenger, NA Challenger is a joke. I've never thought people dominating there was particularly impressive. Season 6, he played for Echo Fox during some of those games because obviously they didn't have a Froggen at some point in time thanks to Reggie fucking up the whole visa situation. What a great guy. Didn't find that convincing at all. And obviously, since we know Froggen was like a carry in that team and did very well despite the team failing sometimes, that made him look even worse. So my problem with him is I think he's had his chances. And I think if he was going to develop, he's already 20 years old. He would already have done it by now. He's already had different chances. He's already had chances to look fantastic in Challenge, which hasn't really done. He's been like good, but hasn't. So to me, he's like an average to below average LCS mid laner. So my issue going into this split is that if you look at his champion pool, it's not a Choi Westall situation. Actually, Golden Glue is a mage player primarily. So actually, I don't even see the point of him being in this team. I do in as much as if Link isn't good, then you want to have Golden Glue. But I think if Link is good or anywhere close to his old level or gets close to his old level, he's just going to beat out Golden Glue for the spot. And Golden Glue just will not be playing. He will be on the bench. Now, admittedly, it might also be good to have Golden Glue in case his personality issues are linked. So that's why I actually think it's a good move in that sense. But I think Golden Glue will ultimately be kind of found to just be obsolete if Link becomes good. Now, Piglet is a very strong player. The obvious setup in this team for me is Piglet is going to be the star player. He is a really good AD carry. What I love about him going to NA, yes, NA is a weaker region, but I never bought this idea that in Season 4, this guy was just garbage because he went to shit towards the end. Yeah, he did go to shit towards the end in Korea, but he still had some good games during other parts of the season, and also, that was Korea. Like, give this guy a chance, let him recover, give him different teammates, and guess what? Yeah, he has become, to me, I was amazed that Team Liquid allowed the issues to bump this guy out of the team, because to me, he was one of the best carries in LCS for the last 2 seasons. So absolutely glad he's back in the lineup. Problem he has is he's a very stubborn player and he has to be the star or carry. That's his mindset. So I don't think that's a problem with this lineup. I think they've got the ideal lineup for that. But that was a problem in the past with other lineups, especially with Loco Doco's mentality of coaching, where he seemed to be of the mentality that, like for me, one of the issues I have with Loco Doco is I think he has a good way of studying the game and reading the game and getting information from Koreans. But one of my issues is I see him as a coach who thinks that the meta is more powerful than your team's strengths. And so he will actually make people play champions and a style within the meta that might work for the best team that has players that fit that, but he sometimes does it in a world where your carries aren't at those positions, and so you would be better off playing a less effective meta style, but one that will be more effective for you and your style. So that's one of the issues I already had in Loco's coaching, and that's why I think the Piglet thing didn't work out there, and why I think they should have stuck with him. Now, I do think that this is a good team for Piglet in terms of it's got some similarities to the team they had before, right? Because they have, I mean, admittedly, in theory, a weaker mid laner. I mean, it's probably fair to say a weaker mid laner. I never thought Phoenix was super duper, but yes, these players are certainly weaker right now. Same top laner, but a jungler who presumably will gank for him. Now, hopefully the fact that Reignover is Korean means that he won't be as annoyed by Piglet and will be able to better relate to Piglet and what he wants and when he wants him to gank, etc. Because that was an issue clearly there, the culture clash between Dardoch, who's an extreme example, a double-if-desk example of a personality from the West, and then Piglet, who's this Korean, but some of the negative aspects of the Korean mentality, unfortunately, where they can sort of try hard to an extent that they become assholes in a way. The final member of the line is Matt. Now, as I said before, I find Matt to be a solid player. I think he can be a good player at times. I think it's very much based around the fact that he did play with Piglet for a lot of the time. I know he had his issues relating to Piglet in that summer split, but my problem with Matt overall is he's a perfect example of one of the trends that annoys me so much in League of Legends, where someone comes in, they have one split, and they might play and be good on 3 or 4 champions, and people already are like, oh, I'm going to hail him as one of the best. He's one of the best in the West, and he's better than X, Y, and Z, who might have been in a period where the meta didn't suit them as well. And then they wonder, oh, why is he falling off? What's going on? Oh, it must be confidence. Now, confidence is such a bullshit thing, because confidence comes from being prepared and being a good player. That's why you are confident in yourself. You don't need someone else to give you the confidence. My issue with Matt is, I think actually his confidence is where it should be. He's a solid player, at times can be above average, and so that's actually where his confidence level is and where he actually kind of understands he is as a player. Now, with that said, his confidence comes from playing with better players. So if he's playing with Piglet, Piglet's doing fantastically. He can be confident knowing I'm with Piglet. I just have to help this guy and he's going to carry the lane. He can be confident if the shot calling in the team's good, if other aspects of the team are good. That's where he's going to get his confidence from. That's what role players do. There's a famous saying, right? I think it might be Phil Jackson who said it, that the system you put in place as the coach isn't for the star player. The star player is going to kind of do what he wants and do what he wants within the system and have the green light to break the system at times. The system is in place to let all the role players know what to do so they know where they're going to be and they can have confidence in that and faith that, right, I just know I have to go here and I have to do this. And therefore, they know how to help the star player and they know how the team is going to operate. That's what the system's for. And to me, players like Matt are ideally suited to fit within the system and then work. My only weakness I see in this lineup really is Lolo, because I have my issues with what will happen if he has to be low econ and low priority again. So in terms of Link, I think Link will win the starting spot. I actually think, even though he's been out of the game for a long time, he's so smart and he's so dedicated when he plays solo queue that I think he can absolutely get to a level where he's better than Golden Glue. And I actually think that by the end of the split, he can be one of the best mids in the LCS. If I had to bet, I would say that Link, by the end of the split, will be a top 4 mid in NA and that he'll have won back this starting spot and he will just be the mid laner of Team Liquid. Now, one of the reasons that he always impressed me in the past is he had his philosophy where he would play all the roles in solo queue. So he would get a better sense of the game and then how a jungler might think if he was attacking this way and what the AD carry wants from this. If he still does that, if he still has that mentality, that's why I see him getting back to a good level very quickly. I also think he can be a secondary shot caller in this team, but I think shot calling in this team might be an issue because I think someone like Reignover, he can only really shot call. I mean, how's that going to work in Thai? That's my issue right there. That's one big question mark I have with this team is how the shot calling will work. Because I think Link should only be a secondary shot caller if you see in his career. Because under pressure, if he breaks down, you want another guy that was the main guy anyway. I think actually one of the problems they had in the CLG lineups with Link is that Link should have been more of a secondary shot caller and should have let Aframu be the primary shot caller. But they had their own issues in that particular sense. Now, I think Piglet actually shares a lot of similarities with Doublelift as a player in terms of how he demands priority, in terms of how stubborn he is, in terms of how unrelenting he is with some of his teammates and doesn't seem to relate to them that well. So that could be an issue, certainly, because that's going to raise some of those old red flags that he used to get from Doublelift. So hopefully he can get over that. I think that Reignover and Piglet, especially because they're Korean and they can work together, I think if you just look at their history as players, I don't think they're likely to choke, really. So I think that should help Link's temperament, and he shouldn't have to worry himself that he will choke. And as I said, I think he will just become one of the top 4. He'll become one of the better mids in the league. And I think people who think that, like, for example, Pobelt is some monster will discover that, like, I actually think Link's the more talented player. I just think that Pobelt was the more stable one and didn't choke in the same way. Might have tilted a bit. That's different from choking, though. So I think for this team, coaching is very important because I think the style is fairly obvious. The style should be based around Piglet being the primary focus, Reignover helping to work with Piglet, and then Reignover commanding most of the map. Then Link coming in as a secondary shot caller, Lolo being a low econ, and Matt just helping out with this, playing within the system and helping out whatever Piglet's ends are. I think the fact that Reignover and Piglet both speak Korean helps a lot. I actually have this team being in the range of between 4th best and 7th best. That's where I think they're going to be. So they're going to certainly be contending for a playoff spot. It's quite likely they'll make the playoffs, but I don't think they're going to go past semi-finals if they make it there. For me at the moment in LCS, there's only, for me, the clear tier 1 is going to be TSM and Dignitas. I think those are the ones that should certainly be ahead of the others. But then you've got a pretty big tier 2 at the moment because we have to see how some of these teams play because some of them certainly could fail. Like Envious could just fail outright. I mean, absolutely. Immortals could just bomb. Who knows? I mean, I think they'll be better than that, but we haven't really seen the lineup play. The thing is, I think in tier 2, with all the question marks, there's a bunch of good lineups that can work different ways. So I have like Cloud9, CLG, Immortals, Team Liquid, Envious, FlyQuest are all in the mix to be tier 2. And then the only clear tier 3 at the moment for me is P1 and Echo Fox. So I think P1's, I don't have a lot of faith in that lineup. I think it's pretty bad. And I think Echo Fox, it all depends on how Looper can play, because I think a lot of Looper's success came from playing with Matter, and he doesn't have Matter. So I know that it's certainly he's gonna. Froggen's obviously used to relying around with solo lane players, but I think Lupa has a lot to prove there. So I think they can be 4th, probably at best. Now, if they did really, really well, I think the best place scenario is probably to be like the 3rd best team. I don't think they're going to be better than TSM. In fact, I think it's certainly not. I don't think they're going to be better than Dignitas, quite frankly, even though TSM's got Wild Turtle. So I think that this is a pretty solid team, actually. Obviously, a lot of it relies upon Link getting good if they want to get in the high end of that and not be in like 7th place. But I think it can happen. And I think actually he's a pretty solid player who, unfortunately, because of his flaws, people overlooked his strengths and the positive qualities he had.